The sun hung low over the horizon, a burning red coin melting into the jagged spine of the western hills. The land stretched endlessly in every direction. Dusty plains broken by sagebrush, twisted cottonwoods along dry creek beds, and the occasional shadow of a hawk circling above. To the east stood a lonely spread of land, fenced in by worn cedar posts and barbed wire, with a two-room cabin crouching against the wind. That ranch belonged to Elias Turner. Elias had been called many things in his 35 years: cowhand, drifter, gunhand, rancher. But most folks who knew him now simply called him the loner. He was a man who preferred silence over chatter, the steady rhythm of cattle over the gossip of town, the company of whiskey over the company of men. His neighbors, what few there were scattered across 50 miles of scrub, respected him but from a distance. Elias carried himself with a quiet edge, the kind of aura that whispered of gun smoke and regrets. The scar along his jaw, carved deep as if a knife had tried to claim his face, didn't invite many questions. Yet for all his solitude, there was one thing: Elias Turner wanted a wife. Not for romance perhaps, nor even companionship in the ordinary sense. What Elias longed for was a family to anchor his restless soul, someone to soften the emptiness that gnawed at the edges of his nights. So after months of staring at blank paper and chewing the ends of pencils, Elias had written a letter. He'd sent it east, to an agency that arranged marriages for men like him. Hard, lonesome frontiersmen who had land but no women willing to cross the miles of dirt road to share it. The reply came back in spring. A woman named Margaret Whitfield, 27, educated daughter of a preacher, widowed by a cholera outbreak, had agreed to marry him. She was traveling by train, then stagecoach, expected to arrive at the nearest depot come summer's end. Elias had spent the last 2 weeks preparing, patching the roof of the cabin, sanding down a rocking chair, even sweeping the porch. For a man who often forgot whether it was Sunday or Thursday, he found himself counting days with the eagerness of a boy. And then the stage rolled in. The town of Redemption Crossing wasn't much to look at. One dusty street lined with false front buildings, the saloon with its swinging doors, the sheriff's office, a general store, a boarding house, and the stage depot that doubled as a telegraph office. On this day, folks turned their heads as the coach rattled in, drawn by 4 wary horses lathered with sweat. The driver cracked his whip, the wheels groaned, and the coach came to a halt in a cloud of dust. Elias was there, boots planted on the wooden planks of the depot, hat brim shadowing his face. His heart, though he'd never admit it, thumped harder than it had during a gunfight. The door swung open, and a woman stepped down, but it wasn't Margaret Whitfield. The woman who emerged was small, delicate, dressed in a plain but clean blouse and skirt that seemed foreign in cut. Her hair, black as midnight, was pulled into a bun. Her eyes, dark, almond-shaped, and watchful, scanned the street with the quick precision of someone dropped into an unfamiliar world. A hush fell over the bystanders. Cowboys leaned against posts, spitting tobacco, muttering. A few children pointed. Elias frowned. He asked cautiously. The woman looked at him. Her lips moved, but what came out wasn't English. It was a flowing, lilting language strange to his ears. The depot clerk shuffled forward, carrying a letter. Mr. Turner. Elias gave a slow nod. The clerk handed him the paper. Elias unfolded it, scanning the lines with growing disbelief. Margaret Whitfield, his intended bride, had fallen ill and died before she could travel. The agency, eager not to lose business, and perhaps desperate in their own way, had sent another in her place. Her name was Mei Lin, from China. She spoke no English. For a long moment Elias stood in the dust, silent except for the sound of wind dragging grit across the street. The crowd watched, waiting for his reaction. Some smirked, some whispered. A rancher wanting a preacher's daughter, and instead being handed a foreign stranger, was the kind of gossip a town could feast on for weeks. Elias folded the letter, slid it into his coat pocket, and finally met Mei Lin's gaze. "You'd best come along," he said. She didn't understand his words, but his tone was steady, not unkind. She gave a cautious nod and followed as he picked up her modest trunk and led her toward his horse and wagon. The ride back to the ranch was long, hot, and silent. Elias handled the reins with the stoicism of a man trying to mask disappointment. Mei Lin sat straight, back beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes darting across the barren landscape. At one point, she tried to speak. A string of soft syllables slipped from her lips, melodic but incomprehensible. Elias only shook his head slightly. "Don't reckon I understand," he muttered. They lapsed back into silence. When they finally arrived, Elias unloaded her trunk and carried it inside the cabin. He gestured to the small spare room, intended for Margaret, now belonging to Mei Lin. She bowed slightly in thanks, though he wasn't sure if that's what it meant. That night, Elias sat on the porch with his pipe, staring out across the dark plains. From inside the cabin, he heard the faint sound of fabric rustling as Mei Lin settled in. 2 strangers under one roof, bound by circumstance. He exhaled smoke and muttered, "Well, Turner, looks like the Lord's got a sense of humor." That the days that followed were awkward. Elias worked the ranch, mending fences, driving cattle, checking water troughs. Mei Lin, though she didn't know the customs, seemed determined to be useful. She swept floors, washed dishes, and even tried cooking, though Elias wasn't sure what to make of the strange spices she used from a small pouch she'd carried across the ocean. They communicated in gestures, nods, and the occasional frustrated sigh. Elias found himself pointing at objects and naming them aloud: chair, horse, water, hoping she'd learn. Sometimes when the evenings were still, he'd hear her humming a tune. The melody was haunting, foreign, but it carried a sorrow that needed no translation. One night, curiosity overcame him. He asked, "What's that song?" knowing full well she couldn't answer. She only smiled faintly, eyes glistening in the lamplight, and continued humming. Something in Elias's chest stirred. Loneliness was a weight he'd carried for years, but now there was a different kind of weight, one that pressed but didn't crush. Still, the town had its opinions. It wasn't long before Elias had to ride into Redemption Crossing for supplies. When he did, whispers followed him. That the woman they sent him looks like a Chinaman's wife. Hell, he ordered a preacher's daughter and got himself a heathen. At the saloon, a rancher named Clay Dobbs, a broad-shouldered man with a cruel streak, decided to make sport of it. "Hey, Turner," he bellowed, slamming his whiskey down. "Heard you sent off for a bride and got the wrong package. What's next? You gonna get yourself a mail-order horse that don't speak English neither?" Laughter rippled through the room. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. He collected his supplies, tipped his hat, and left. But Clay Dobbs wasn't done. That night, he and a pair of rough hands rode out near Elias's ranch. They circled the house, shouting insults, throwing rocks, trying to scare the woman inside. Elias stepped onto the porch with his rifle, calm as stone. "Ride on," he said. Clay sneered. "Or what? You gonna shoot a man over that little foreign bird you got in there?" Elias didn't answer. He simply cocked the rifle. The sound cracked through the night louder than any word. Dobbs spat, muttered a curse, and finally rode off with his men. But his pride had been wounded, and men like him didn't forget slights. As the weeks dragged on, Elias found himself torn. On one hand, Mei Lin wasn't the bride he'd wanted, or even chosen. She was an accident of fate, a stranger whose language and customs set her apart from everyone in Redemption Crossing. On the other hand, there was resilience in her, a quiet strength. She worked hard, endured the stares when she went to town, and never once complained. One evening, after a long day branding calves, Elias came into the cabin to find the table set. Mei Lin had cooked. The food was different. No beans, no salt pork, no cornbread. Instead, there was rice flavored with something aromatic, and bits of dried meat stewed with herbs he couldn't name. He hesitated, fork in hand. She watched him nervously, waiting. He took a bite. It was good, better than good. His eyes widened slightly. Mei Lin smiled, relief softening her face. Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned." It was a small thing, but it broke something open between them. From then on, the silence between Elias Turner and Mei Lin felt less like a wall, and more like a bridge under construction. But bridges can be fragile, and out here on the frontier, trouble always rode on the horizon. The next morning, the air was sharp with the scent of mesquite smoke. Elias Turner rose before dawn, as he always did, pulling on his boots and shrugging into his worn coat. But when he opened the cabin door, he found something unusual. Mei Lin, already awake, standing barefoot on the porch with a small bowl of water in her hands. She dipped her fingers, sprinkled the water to the earth, and whispered in her own tongue. Elias paused, watching. It wasn't prayer in any form he knew, but it carried the weight of reverence. For a moment he felt like an intruder, but she turned, caught his gaze, and smiled faintly as if to say good morning. He tipped his hat. Morning. They shared a quiet breakfast, his coffee and jerky, her rice from a sack she'd brought across the ocean. Words weren't needed, but the peace didn't last. By midday, the dust cloud of riders rose from the south. Elias spotted them from the ridge above the cattle pens, Clay Dobbs and 3 of his men. They came fast, their laughter carrying on the wind. Elias rode down to meet them, rifle slung across his back, posture calm but watchful. "Dobbs," he said evenly as the men pulled up, horses blowing hard. Clay grinned, his teeth yellow against his sunburned skin. "Turner, just paying a friendly visit. Heard you've been keeping yourself busy with that little foreign gal." Elias's jaw worked, but he kept his voice flat. "You best say your piece." Dobbs leaned forward in the saddle. "She don't belong here. You know it, the town knows it. I reckon she ought to be sent back east, or wherever the hell she crawled out from. You take a woman like that in, you're asking for trouble." "She's my wife," Elias said simply. The men chuckled. Dobbs sneered. "Mail order bride, don't make her your wife, Turner. She's a mistake, and I ain't gonna sit by and let Redemption Crossing fill up with the likes of her." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Ain't yer say?" Dobbs's hand drifted toward his revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead, he spat in the dust and turned his horse. We'll see about that. The riders galloped off, leaving the air heavy with the promise of violence. That evening, Elias sat on the porch, oiling his rifle. Mei Lin appeared beside him holding a cup of water. She handed it to him, her eyes questioning. He drank, nodded his thanks. She hesitated, then touched her chest. Mei Lin, she said slowly. Elias blinked, then nodded. Mei Lin. She pointed to him. Elias, he said. She repeated it carefully. Elias. For the first time in weeks he smiled. The days passed with mounting tension. Dobbs and his men made sport of stirring the town, whispering that Elias Turner was betraying his kind by harboring a foreigner. Some men didn't care, but others, poisoned by Dobbs's words, began to look at Elias with suspicion. The sheriff, Tom Caldwell, paid Elias a visit. Turner, he said, reins creaking as he reined up outside the ranch. I don't aim to meddle in your affairs, but the town's uneasy. Clay Dobbs has been stirring folks up something fierce. You watch yourself. You Elias nodded. Appreciate the warning. The sheriff hesitated. You care for that woman? Elias glanced toward the cabin where Mei Lin was hanging laundry, the sun glinting on her black hair. Care or not, she's under my roof. That's enough. Caldwell tipped his hat, his weathered face tight with concern, and rode on. The breaking point came at the harvest dance, held in the town square each autumn. Elias hadn't planned to attend, but Mei Lin, through gestures and persistence, made it clear she wanted to see it. Against his better judgment, he saddled the wagon and drove them both into town. The square was alive with lanterns, fiddles, and laughter. Couples danced, children chased one another, and tables groaned with food. But when Elias and Mei Lin stepped down, the music faltered. Heads turned, whispers rose like locusts. Elias ignored them, guiding Mei Lin to a bench. She looked around with wide eyes, taking in the colors, the music, the clapping feet. For a moment, wonder lit her face. Then Clay Dobbs appeared. Well, he drawled, stepping forward, whiskey in hand. If it ain't Turner and his China doll. The square went quiet. Elias's voice was calm. Clay, walk away. But Dobbs only smirked. Ain't no place for her here. Why don't you take her back to your shack and keep her out of sight, where she belongs? Mei Lin didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her smile faded. Elias stood, his height casting a shadow across Dobbs. You're crossing a line. Dobbs's hand twitched toward his gun. Elias's eyes locked on him, and in that frozen second, the crowd held its breath. But Sheriff Caldwell pushed through. Nuff, this ain't the time nor the place. Dobbs, put it away. Turner, take your lady home. The tension broke like glass underfoot. Elias guided Mei Lin back to the wagon, ignoring the mutters behind him. But he knew it wasn't over. The 2 nights later, the storm came. Elias woke to the sound of horses. Outside, torches flared. Dobbs and 6 men surrounded the cabin, shouting, Turn her out, Turner! We don't want her here! Elias grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber. Mei Lin clutched his arm, eyes wide with terror. Stay inside, he told her. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the look. She nodded, retreating into the shadows. Elias stepped onto the porch. You're making a mistake, he called. Dobbs sneered. The mistake was letting her stay. Last chance, Turner. Hand her over. The men brandished guns, torches flickering in the wind. Elias raised his rifle. Not while I'm breathing. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a shot cracked the night. The fight was chaos, gunfire, shouts, the crash of glass as bullets tore into the cabin. Elias dropped one man with a clean shot, then another. But they were too many. Bullets tore splinters from the porch post. Inside, Mei Lin screamed. Rage burned through Elias like wildfire. He fired, reloaded, fired again, moving with the deadly precision of a man who'd lived by the gun before. By dawn, it was over. 3 men lay dead, 2 wounded fled into the night, and Clay Dobbs crawled in the dirt, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Elias stood over him, revolver aimed. Please, Dobbs gasped. Don't kill me. Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. Then he saw Mei Lin in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide. Slowly, Elias lowered the gun. You leave Redemption Crossing, he said coldly. If I see you again, I finish it. Dobbs spat blood, scrambled to his horse, and rode into the distance. The aftermath shook the town. Sheriff Caldwell questioned Elias, but no charges were brought. Most folks agreed Dobbs had pushed too far. The dead men were buried, their names soon to be forgotten. But Elias knew the trouble had left its mark. Some would always whisper, some would never accept Mei Lin, and yet others had seen her courage. During the fight, she had pulled Elias back from the line of fire, pressed a cloth to his grazed arm, her small hand steady despite the chaos. That kind of bravery couldn't be ignored. Slowly, grudgingly, the town's gaze began to shift. One evening, weeks later, Elias sat by the fire, turning his pipe in his hands. Mei Lin sat opposite, sewing a torn shirt. The cabin was quiet, the storm of violence behind them. At length, Elias cleared his throat. He said softly. She looked up. He touched his chest. Husband. Then he pointed to her. Wife. Her eyes softened. She repeated, carefully, wife. Elias nodded. A silence fell between them, not empty but full of something unspoken, something that needed no translation. Outside, the prairie stretched endless beneath the stars. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Elias Turner didn't feel alone. The loner rancher had waited for his bride. Fate had sent him someone else, someone unexpected, someone who didn't speak his language but spoke to his soul. And in the Wild West, that was enough.